تبارك الذي بيده الملك وهو على كل شيء قدير.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين وأصلي وسلم على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه ومن تمسك بسنته إلى يوم الدين أما بعد. Continuing our theme with the blessed chapters, the final second last juz of the Qur'an, Juzz Tabarak. These 11 surahs speaking primarily about the last day. And the reason for speaking about the last day, as we mentioned, is to develop our iman and our belief and our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and to develop a path of actions. And thus this surah continues that theme. It doesn't fall short in speaking about the last day. The title of this surah being called Al-Haqqah, the reality or the truth or the establishment of the truth that will take place on the last day. And just to give us a general synopsis of this surah, or the general theme of this surah, is speaking about the last day, and then begins to speak about those nations or those tribes or those people that existed before and who were destroyed, who did not believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or who rejected the last day, or began to reject the promise of the prophets that were sent to them, and gives this severe warning for many of us in today's climate, in today's world, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can send various calamities and distractions upon a nation or upon a people if they begin to become ungrateful or full of ingratitude towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And via these punishments or these awakenings that we find inside the Qur'an, what should begin to take place for the individual is what this surah begins to highlight, is a path of preparation to meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and to be worried about their record or the end return. Just as we begin to get worried about what will take place upon this earth, that a person who's given their record in the right hand, they will rejoice as a sign of success given to them in this dunya. And a person who's given no record, or the record or the book is thrown at them or given from behind their back or ripped up and thrown in front of their face, meaning there's no value for this individual, how that person become upset about their grades or what they've achieved inside this dunya. And that is an image that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala displays inside this surah, inside al-akhirah, people being given their record in their right hand or people being given their record in the left hand. And this surah encourages that the human being living upon this earth will get whatever they pursue inside this world, whether it be umur al-dunyawiyya, whether it be affairs of the dunya or affairs, spiritual affairs of al-akhirah. وَلَيْسَ لِلْإِنسَانِ إِلَّا مَا سَعَى. The human being will only have whatever he or she strives for. That if you strive towards al-akhirah, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will open up the paths towards the hereafter. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, وَالَّذِينَ جَاهَدُوا فِينَا لَنَهْدِيَنَّهُمْ سُبُلَنَا. Whoever strives in our paths, we will open up our paths for those individuals. And the opposite is true as well, that people begin to drift away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then Allah opens up paths, or many paths, for those individuals to deviate and to traverse further and further away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And amongst the key factors inside this surah that we find is the establishment of the prayer and obedience towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this surah begins by speaking about al-haqqah, the reality. Then it mentions mal-haqqah. What is this reality? What is this truth? وَمَا أَدْرَاكَ مَا الْحَاقَّةُ. And what will explain to you what this reality, what this truth is. And this is a common theme inside the Qur'an, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will repeat, trying to establish something, or establishing or affirming for us to pay attention. The Arabs had this common theme that they would repeat certain things 3 times for human beings to begin to pay, or listeners to begin to pay attention towards them. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is driving us to pay attention towards what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to speak about. And even the word al-haqqah, as ulama of language or lugha that they speak, it contains a deep impact, that is something important for us to pay attention towards it. Because even the name itself is one of the names of Asma'ul Yawm al-Qiyamah, amongst the names of the Day of Judgment. And some of the ulama have collected some 80 different names, or primarily some 20 or 24 odd names that exist inside the Qur'an, and then they begin to stretch them, or to begin to expand upon them, of different attributes or different titles or descriptions of the last day, which takes it to approximately about 80, which are mentioned inside the Qur'an. As Imam Qurtubi, he he collects a large portion of these names. Amongst those that come to mind, which are primarily inside this juz, in Juzz Tabarak and Juzz Amma, that we find is As-Sakha, Al-Taghiya, that we find Al-Qari'ah, Al-Haqqah, Al-Ghashiyah. Is all amongst the names that we find inside these final two surahs, and other names that we find inside the Qur'an: Yawmul Hisab, Yawmul Qiyamah, Yawmul Taghabun, Yawmul Mi'ad. All these different names inside the Qur'an, all speaking about the day of reckoning, a day of resurrection. Why are there so many names mentioned inside the Qur'an about the last day? As some of the ulama they mentioned, because a repetition of certain names or certain words inside the Qur'an tadullu ala al-ahmiyah. It shows that this is an important topic. So you'll find throughout the Qur'an that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, near enough every other page, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will speak about certain different affairs, but always will bring the topic back to in relation towards the last day, in preparation for the last day, or the establishment of the last day, or belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is a common theme. Even when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about rules, ahkam, rules and regulations, for example, Surah Al-Baqarah, which is primarily a Medinan surah, which speaks about ahkam, rules and regulations. If you pay attention to this surah, that even in these rules and regulations, many times Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will take the discussion back towards the last day. So in the siyaq, in the context of the verses which speak about the taking of interest and the forbiddance of interest, and then after that speaking about ayatul dain, which is classified as the longest ayah inside the Qur'an, the ayah of writing down of taking a loan or taking a debt. It takes one whole page inside a Mus'haf Uthmani that we read. In between these two verses, or these contexts of verses that we find speaking about business transactions and being upon this dunya, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions this verse inside verse number 281, وَاتَّقُوا يَوْمًا تُرْجَعُونَ فِيهِ إِلَى اللَّهِ ثُمَّ تُوَفَّى كُلُّ نَفْسٍ مَا كَسَبَتْ وَهُمْ لَا يُظْلَمُونَ. Allah mentions right in this discussion in between interest and the forbiddance of interest and taking a loan and writing debts and bringing witnesses, Allah then places this verse in between these verses, وَاتَّقُوا يَوْمًا تُرْجَعُونَ فِيهِ إِلَى اللَّهِ. Fear that day whereby you're going to return back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Imam Suyuti inside Al-Itqan fi Ulum al-Quran mentioned this is the final verse sent down to the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. So this is the final verse, that no revelation came after this. The Prophet alayhi salam lived for only some 9 days after this verse was sent down. And look at the power of this verse. وَاتَّقُوا يَوْمًا تُرْجَعُونَ فِيهِ إِلَى اللَّهِ. Fear that day whereby you're going to return back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and no individual will be oppressed on that day. So Al-Haqqah, this reality that we find amongst his names, this surah is given the title Al-Haqqah. Imam al-Firozabadi, he gives the title of surah Silsila, because inside this surah it mentions that on that day where people will come inside 70 cubits or chains that be wrapped around them, will be dragged and brought forth on that day. So he entitles this surah to be called Surah As-Silsila, and this is an extraction that the Sheikh has made himself. And you find that many different ulama of Tafseer could give different names or titles to surahs depending on certain key words that exist inside that surah. So this surah, some 50 odd verses that we find, as we mentioned, primarily speaking about the last day and awakening this desire in preparation for the last day, and at the same time making us to become fearful about the last day. And even inside this surah itself, it speaks primarily about the last day, whether it be فَإِذَا نُفِخَ فِي الصُّورِ, that when the trumpet is blown. So there's numerous inferences or references inside this actual surah about the last day, which are mentioned inside this surah. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala poses this rhetorical question: what will explain to you what the last day is? As it mentions, Al-Qari'ah, Mal-Qari'ah, wa ma adraka Mal-Qari'ah. And once again, Al-Qari'ah, فَأَمَّا ثَمُودُ فَأُهْلِكُوا بِالطَّاغِيَةِ فَأَمَّا عَادٌ فَأُهْلِكُوا بِالْقَارِعَةِ. And the people of Ad, they were destroyed with Al-Qari'ah, with the striking tremor, the striking sound is coming with this blast that came when it destroyed them. So Al-Qari'ah, the word Al-Qari'ah actually comes inside this surah, is amongst one of the names of the last day. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala begins to speak about these nations or these tribes that they were destroyed. And some of the ulama mentioned, why does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala specifically mention the people of Ad and the people of Thamud beginning inside this surah? Because primarily these are the nations that the Quraysh, they could relate to them. Even though inside this surah it mentions about Musa, it mentions about Fir'aun, how he destroyed, Mu'tafikat, the people of Lut, how they destroyed, the people of Nuh alayhi salam, how they were destroyed. So it mentions numerous single verses and nations, how they were destroyed, to send out a message about those individuals who deviated away from the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, those nations who went against their prophets or went against the commandments of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, how they were destroyed. But in the beginning, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala specifically focused upon these two nations because the Quraysh, they could relate to them, because the people of Ad and the people of Thamud were in the proximity of the people of the Quraysh, either being in the north of the Quraysh or towards the south of the Quraysh. So they knew of the existence of these nations or these tribes or these people, or their remnants remained there. فَهَلْ تَرَى لَهُم مِّن بَاقِيَةٍ. Can you see any of their remnants? Meaning that their remnants do remain behind, but meaning any of their legacy about these nations, does it remain behind? Is there anything of benefit that you can gain via these great big nations? And this is a common theme inside the Qur'an, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will speak about great nations and tribes and their existence and their cultural development, their civilization, what they developed. وَكَانُوا يَنْحِتُونَ مِنَ الْجِبَالِ بُيُوتًا. They used to chew away, they used to make mansions, palaces inside, carved palaces, homes, dwellings inside the mountains. So this shows a great architectural ability of building dwellings inside mountains, of carving buildings and residential palaces inside mountains. But how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wiped all these nations and all these people away because of their disbelief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or then their rejection of the prophets that were sent to them. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions these prophets inside this surah in the beginning to remind us that we can go and study each individual of these prophets that are mentioned inside this surah, because it's a theme in itself. So some of the ulama have collected the stories of these various prophets, whether it be Ibn Kathir's Qasas al-Anbiya, stories of the prophets that we find, or we find Qasas al-Qur'an al-Kareem of Dr. Fadl Abbas that we find, which is beneficial to read, or we find Taysir al-Mannan ala Qasas al-Qur'an of Sheikh Ahmed Farid, which is a good book speaking about the various stories that existed in the Qur'an, or the nations and the people existed inside the Qur'an, and stories of the prophets, and how those individuals who went against the message of the prophets, how they were destroyed. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is placing this inside the Qur'an to remind the Quraysh that those who went against the commandments of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, how they were destroyed, and there remains no remnants about them. Rather, it gives such a visual depiction that they are lying there like stumped out palm trees who have just been uprooted from the ground, have just pulled out the ground, and they're lying there on the ground. Is how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala described how these individuals, how these people were destroyed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions about the various nations, the tribes and various people that existed before, how they were destroyed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As we mentioned, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned, فَأَمَّا ثَمُودُ فَأُهْلِكُوا بِالطَّاغِيَةِ, that the people of Thamud that were destroyed with a great big destruction. وَأَمَّا عَادٌ فَأُهْلِكُوا بِرِيحٍ صَرْصَرٍ عَاتِيَةٍ, the people of Ad, they were destroyed with a wind, sarsarin, a scorching wind, in the atiyah that came continuously, that came upon them and destroyed these individuals. And some said it mentions that this was a wind that came upon them that had no compassion. It was a forceful wind that came and destroyed this nation, destroyed these individuals. سَخَّرَهَا عَلَيْهِمْ سَبْعَ لَيَالٍ وَثَمَانِيَةَ أَيَّامٍ حُصُومًا. So 7 days, it came 7 nights and 8 days, that this continuous punishment was placed upon these individuals. فَتَرَى الْقَوْمَ فِيهَا صَرْعَى كَأَنَّهُمْ أَعْجَازُ نَخْلٍ خَاوِيَةٍ. And these individuals, فِيهَا صَرْعَى بِمَعْنَى مَوْتًى, they were just lying as dead individuals who were lying there, destroyed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. كَأَنَّهُمْ أَعْجَازُ نَخْلٍ خَاوِيَةٍ, as if they are stumped out, the roots of trees, of a palm tree, stumped out, pulled out of the ground, and lying there flat on the surface of the earth. فَهَلْ تَرَى لَهُم مِّن بَاقِيَةٍ, do you see any remnants of existence of these individuals that we've destroyed? Then Allah mentions, وَجَاءَ فِرْعَوْنُ وَمَنْ قَبْلَهُ وَالْمُؤْتَفِكَاتُ بِالْخَاطِئَةِ, and came many prior to them, وَمَنْ قَبْلَهُ, prior to these nations, these tribes, came Fir'aun, and another qira'ah, وَمِنْ قِبَلِهِ, from amongst the people of Fir'aun. وَالْمُؤْتَفِكَاتُ, Wal-Mu'tafikat is the people of Lut alayhi salam, bil khati'ah, with the sins that they came with. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is speaking about these other nations, and we're all familiar with Fir'aun, of what he claimed to be, Ana Rabbukum al-A'la, I'm your all mighty Lord and deity that I should be worshipped. And look how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala destroyed this individual and the people of Lut, how they were destroyed as well. If we look at the area of the Dead Sea that we find according to the Qur'an, other sources as well, this is the area whereby the people of Lut alayhi salam, that they were destroyed. فَعَصَوْا رَسُولَ رَبِّهِمْ, so they disobeyed the messenger of the Lord that was sent to these individuals. فَأَخَذَهُمْ أَخْذَةً رَابِيَةً, and you find this severe punishment was taken upon them. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions the people of Nuh alayhi salam as well. إِنَّا لَمَّا طَغَى الْمَاءُ حَمَلْنَاكُمْ فِي الْجَارِيَةِ, that when the water it reached its peak, then we began to drown or began to destroy the rest of the nation. So if we ponder over all these single verses and these single nations, and if we can go back to the Qur'an and see how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala destroyed each and every single one of these nations, and begin to try to focus, what was it that these nations or these people that were doing, that they were exposed to such a great immense destruction by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. لِنَجْعَلَهَا لَكُمْ تَذْكِرًا, that we may place this as a reminder for you, that all these lessons, stories of the past inside the Qur'an, that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned these stories inside the Qur'an for an ibrah. لَقَدْ كَانَ لَكُمْ فِي قَصَصِهِمْ ibrah. Inside these stories there is ibrah, is a lesson, a maw'idah, an admonition, that a person seeks the admonition via these stories mentioned inside the Qur'an. وَتَعِيَهَا أُذُنٌ وَاعِيَةٌ, for whoever, a person who lends an ear, a person who is attentive, who listens to these stories to rectify themselves. If that in itself was not enough to awaken the individual, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then travels to give a more deeper depiction about the last day. Meaning that if that doesn't scare the person to read about the remnants or the people of the past, how they were destroyed, the punishment that befell these individuals, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala takes it a step further. فَإِذَا نُفِخَ فِي الصُّورِ, now on the day of judgment, when the trumpet is blown, نَفْخَةٌ وَاحِدَةٌ, the first blowing of the trumpet takes place, وَحُمِلَتِ الْأَرْضُ وَالْجِبَالُ فَدُكَّتَ دَكَّةً وَاحِدَةً, that you find that the mountains, the earth will cleft asunder, the mountains will be crushed apart. And this is similar to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned in Surah Al-Fajr, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will pound the mountains, turn them into dust. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned, وَجَاءَ رَبُّكَ وَالْمَلَكُ صَفًّا صَفًّا وَجِيءَ يَوْمَئِذٍ بِجَهَنَّمَ, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will come and the angels will come in rows, and you find that on that day Jahannam, it will be dragged forth. And even inside Surah Al-Fajr, if you study in great detail, you find inside the beginning once again speaking about the nations and the tribes and those individuals who were destroyed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who had reached a peak inside civilization, a peak inside development inside this earth. But that's not what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala requires for us to do. It's just to live upon this earth and to develop upon this earth. He wants us to spread the message of belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. فَيَوْمَئِذٍ وَقَعَتِ الْوَاقِعَةِ, on that day when al-waqi'ah, the reality is established. So here once again ulama mentioned that inside this surah, as we mentioned, al-qari'ah, the name of the day of judgment, al-haqqah, the name of the day of judgment, and here we find al-waqi'ah, the reality as well. And as a side point, we find Surah Al-Waqi'ah, the 56th chapter of the Qur'an, which is all once again speaking about the last day. وَانْشَقَّتِ السَّمَاءُ فَهِيَ يَوْمَئِذٍ وَاهِيَةٌ, you find that the heavens will be pulled asunder, ripped apart, and you find there will be nothing that will be left of this. وَالْمَلَكُ عَلَى أَرْجَائِهَا وَيَحْمِلُ عَرْشَ رَبِّكَ فَوْقَهُمْ يَوْمَئِذٍ ثَمَانِيَةٌ, and you find that the 8 angels will be carrying the throne of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on that day. يَوْمَئِذٍ تُعْرَضُونَ لَا تَخْفَى مِنْكُمْ خَافِيَةٌ, on that day everything will be exposed and nothing can be hidden on that day. So when a person is now standing in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there's no fleeing, there's no escaping, there's no hiding anything from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Meaning that the person should begin to have this feeling inside this dunya, on this earth, being worried about when they will be exposed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on that day. So that's why ulama mentioned that at-taqwa, Allah, consciousness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, fi sir, is not alaniya, is not always apparent, even though apparent it should be in certain places, etc. We find, but the key element of taqwa, consciousness, is in a hidden affair, in a state of secrecy, when a person is in a state of solitude on their own and their devotion and commitment to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, فَأَمَّا مَنْ أُوتِيَ كِتَابَهُ بِيَمِينِهِ فَيَقُولُ هَا أُمُقْرَأُ كِتَابِيَهْ, And as for the individual who's been given their record in their right hand, this individual will say, Ha umuqra'u, come, ta'alaw, come, iqra'u kitabiya, come and read my record, my book. So this is a sign of joy, just like a person may pass their exams, pass university, pass their driving test, pass any exam inside this dunya. Person will go rushing back to their family members or the people that they love and say, look, come, look at the success, look at what I've achieved. Inni dhanantu anni mulaqin hisabiya. And I thought I was going to meet my accountability. But here, inni dhanantu, because dhan is a word in the Arabic language that has two meanings, two opposite meanings. It can mean at times dhan as in conjecture or doubt, and it can also mean yaqeen. That a certain place inside the Qur'an, it can mean yaqeen, certainty. So here, the meaning here isn't I doubted my accountability, I doubted belief in the last day. Here it says I believed, I had the yaqeen that indeed I'm going to meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the last day. Just as we find in the beginning of the Qur'an that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions that those individuals about the prayer, وَإِنَّهَا لَكَبِيرَةٌ إِلَّا عَلَى الْخَاشِعِينَ الَّذِينَ يَظُنُّونَ أَنَّهُمْ مُلَاقُو رَبِّهِمْ. Indeed, the prayer is going to be something very, very difficult, except for the pious or the khashi'in, those who are observant of their prayer. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions الَّذِينَ يَظُنُّونَ أَنَّهُمْ مُلَاقُو رَبِّهِمْ. Those, some of us may translate it as those who think they're going to meet their Lord. But that doesn't make sense, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is praising those individuals who establish their prayer and fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the meaning here of dhan, الَّذِينَ يَظُنُّونَ, is those who believe deeply, they're grounded, that they know for a fact they're going to meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so this shows us the importance of understanding the language of the Qur'an, that there are certain passages, certain words that we shouldn't feel that we can freely pick up the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to be able to engage with it and to understand it. The Qur'an primarily has been sent down in the Arabic language. It can only be understood inside the pure, pristine language that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent the Qur'an in. And that's why a person should resort back to works of Tafseer, and even certain ulama specialize in just language. Imam Nasafi just specializes inside language of the Qur'an to understand the language of the Qur'an. Imam Zamakhshari, Sahib al-Kashaf, also focus upon the language, and amongst the most profound ulama Tafseer that we find is, if I'm not mistaken, Al-Bahr al-Muhit of Abu Hayyan al-Andalusi, who specializes specifically in the linguistics of the Qur'an and importance of the language of the Qur'an. So this individual, فَهُوَ فِي عِيشَةٍ رَاضِيَةٍ, this individual will be in a state of felicity, in a life of success, in a life of happiness. Once again, if we resort back to Surah Al-Fajr, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions about the soul, the good soul, when it be said to the good soul, enter fadkhuli fi ibadi wadkhuli jannati, enter amongst my servants. The soul with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is happy with that soul, enter into my paradise, enter amongst my servants. So this soul or this individual who's passed the test or been successful, فَهُوَ فِي عِيشَةٍ رَاضِيَةٍ, just like inside Surah Al-Qari'ah as well, the person will be in a state of success. فِي جَنَّةٍ عَالِيَةٍ, in these lofty gardens of paradise, this individual will be resorting there. قُطُوفُهَا دَانِيَةٍ, that you find that its branches, daniyatun, carries a meaning. As ulama tafsir, they mention that the branches won't be just flowing or hanging there. The branches will be reaching over to the individual. So the person, whatever they think about the fruits on the tip of those branches, then those branches will lower down to them, and the fruits will be given to them. They'll eat from those fruits, and then the branches will move back to its location. Kulu washrabu hani'an bima aslaftum fil ayyamil khaliyah. Eat and drink and rejoice because of the days that passed you by previously. Meaning that, as we began with, that this world is a world of action, a world of preparation. The akhirah, the hereafter, is whereby you reap your fruits. The fruits that what you sowed inside this dunya, you're going to reap them inside. The harvest is inside al-akhirah. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala refers to al-akhirah. Kulu washrabu hani'an bima aslaftum fil ayyamil khaliyah. Rejoice, eat and drink with that which you done in your previous days. Meaning inside Jannah there's no amal, there's no actions inside Jannah, there's no prayer, there's no fasting inside Jannah. Now rejoice and redeem the actions or the blessings of your actions inside paradise in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَأَمَّا مَنْ أُوتِيَ كِتَابَهُ بِالشِّمَالِ فَيَقُولُ يَا لَيْتَنِي لَمْ أُوتَ كِتَابِيَهْ. As for the individual who's been given their record in their left hand. Another place inside the Qur'an, Allah mentioned, مِنْ وَرَاءِ ظَهْرِهِ, from behind their back. Total disrespect that a person's gifting somebody a certificate or graduation, they keep their hand behind their back, not even to present it to the individual, is a degrading, demeaning way of showing disrespect or showing a state of loss for that individual inside the Qur'an. وَأَمَّا مَنْ أُوتِيَ كِتَابَهُ بِشِمَالِهِ فَيَقُولُ يَا لَيْتَنِي لَمْ أُوتَ كِتَابِيَهْ. As for the individual who's given their record, their book inside their left hand, this individual will scream or shout out, لَمْ أُوتَ كِتَابِيَهْ. If only I wasn't given, my book wasn't given to me. وَلَمْ أَدْرِ مَا حِسَابِيَهْ. If I didn't know what my record was. Meaning the person is confessing themselves that they know they are in a state of loss. There's not much they've done on the face of the earth. There wasn't many actions that they've done. There was just pure disbelief and rejection of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then this person will say, يَا لَيْتَهَا كَانَتِ الْقَاضِيَةِ. If only this never came to existence. And this is common inside the Qur'an, that those who disbelieved in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they'll make this wail, will continue inside al-akhirah. Woe upon me, I took so-and-so as a friend. Woe upon me, I followed such and such individuals. Woe upon me, I didn't pay heed to the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Meaning that the individual has no excuses. They're acknowledging themselves that every excuse that they could have was exposed to them inside this dunya. Opportunity was given to the individual to recognize Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this individual will begin to say, if only this record never came into existence, or this was never ever decreed, then he will say, ما أغنى عني مالية. Then he begins to list. And some of the ulama said that these things that the person begins to list are those things that they thought would give them success, or those things that would rescue them, or those things that would help them. So the first thing the person mentions, ما أغنى عني مالية. My wealth hasn't benefited me. So that wealth that they were chasing after in this dunya, trying to build their empire, build their wealth, whether it be halal means or haram means, they're focusing upon that wealth is not going to help them on that day, because they never use that wealth in the service or in the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. هَلَكَ عَنِّي سُلْطَانِيَةً. Yani my strength, my power has been taken away. Another objective that people may have to become powerful individuals on the face of this earth, what they rule and what they conquer and what they have inside them is taken away from them. It doesn't benefit them. No matter what type of person you may be on the face of this earth, inside al-akhirah, none of that entourage or that dunya will benefit the individual. خُذُوهُ فَغُلُّوهُ. Take him and punish him, or place him inside فَغُلُّوهُ, inside Jahannam, inside the punishment. ثُمَّ الْجَحِيمَ صَلُّوهُ. And then throw him inside al-Jahim. Al-Jahim is one of the names of Jahannam. ثُمَّ فِي سِلْسِلَةٍ ذَرْعُهَا سَبْعُونَ ذِرَاعًا فَاسْلُكُوهُ. Then chain him up with a chain which is 70 cubits or 70 feet in length. Chain this individual. In other words, there's no compassion towards him. That's why Imam Sa'di inside his Tafseer, he mentions that this person who had no rahmah, no compassion, they're going to be treated in this way, because this is what the punishment that is deserving towards these individuals. Because Allah mentioned, إِنَّهُ كَانَ لَا يُؤْمِنُ بِاللَّهِ الْعَظِيمِ. Because this individual never believed in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Never believed. وَلَا يَحُضُّ عَلَى طَعَامِ الْمِسْكِينِ. Never used to feed the poor individuals. So all his wealth, his power, whatever they had, there's no mercy, there's no compassion. So no compassion this individual showed inside the dunya, no compassion will be shown to this individual inside al-akhirah. فَلَيْسَ لَهُ الْيَوْمَ هَاهُنَا حَمِيمٌ. So on this day, there's going to be no hamim, no close friend, no companion, no helper for them. وَلَا طَعَامٌ إِلَّا مِنْ غِسْلِينَ. And their ta'am, their food, and they will be ghislin. And ulama, they begin to discuss that the ghislin is the pus, the sweat, the blood of the individual. That's their ta'am. That's what their food is going to be inside Jahannam, given to these individuals. لا يأكله إلا الخاطئون. And only those who were wrongdoers, this is what the food that these individuals, the food they're going to be given inside al-akhirah. فَلَا أُقْسِمُ بِمَا تُبْصِرُونَ. And then we take an oath by that which you can visualize. وَمَا لَا تُبْصِرُونَ. Meaning, you visualize in the beginning of this surah, those nations that were destroyed and what happened to them. that some of their athar, some of their remnants are still there, whether it be the Dead Sea that we find, whether it be some of the remnants inside the people of Qawm Ad or Qawm Thamud that we find some of their relics still existing there, of how whether it be the Fara'ina, the Fir'aun inside Egypt, we find some of their relics are there to show how these people were destroyed. And then that which you don't see, which you don't visualize, meaning what will take place inside Al-Akhirah, إِنَّهُ لَقَوْلُ رَسُولٍ كَرِيمٍ. Indeed, these words, whether it be the words of the Prophet, meaning he's narrating the Qur'an, or the revelation given to Jibreel, or this actual Qur'an, this is a reality. This is a fact. This is revelation. وَمَا هُوَ بِقَوْلِ شَاعِرٍ. And this is not the statement of a poet. وَلَا قَلِيلًا مَا تُؤْمِنُونَ. And little do you believe. Because remember, this surah, as we mentioned, began with addressing the Quraysh. And the Quraysh, they were shu'ara, they were poets. They were well versed inside the Arabic language. They understood the prose and the similes and the text of the Arabic language and poetry. So they thought, some of them, that maybe the Qur'an is some form of poetry. And even some of the ulama Tafseer, they mention that these are the first few verses that Umar al-Khattab, he heard them inside his life, even though he became Muslim much later on, when he heard the verses from Surah Taha, the 20th chapter of Qur'an, the first verses until verse number 14, that really penetrated his heart. But some of the ulama mentioned these are the first verses of Qur'an that he heard, that he thought maybe the Qur'an is some form of poetry. And then when he heard the Prophet reading this surah, Surah Al-Haqqah, وَمَا هُوَ بِقَوْلِ شَاعِرٍ, inside the Musnad Imam Ahmad, this has been mentioned, وَمَا هُوَ بِقَوْلِ شَاعِرٍ قَلِيلًا مَا تُؤْمِنُونَ. Little it is that you believe. وَلَا بِقَوْلِ كَاهِنٍ. Maybe it's a statement of a soothsayer, a magician. قَلِيلًا مَا تَذَكَّرُونَ. Little it is that you ponder. These words are dynamic in the words, how they're placed. تَنزِيلُ مِنْ رَبِّ الْعَالَمِينَ. This is revelation from the Lord of the worlds, from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the ulama say that as if the final part of this surah is emphasizing about the last day, or about the Qur'an, about the speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because the more that you believe in the speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Qur'an, then the last day becomes an easy concept for a person to follow inside their life. When you don't believe in the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you don't have that deep affiliation in that which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is addressing or speaking to us about, then naturally the concept of the last day is going to be far away from our mind. If we don't read the Qur'an, we don't engage with the Qur'an, as we mentioned, that the Qur'an every page or so always returns to speak about the last day or the belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَلَوْ تَقَوَّلَ عَلَيْنَا بَعْدُ الْأَقَاوِيلِ. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives this severe warning that which you're trying to attribute to the Prophet ﷺ, that maybe he wrote it himself, maybe it's his own words. Even though we know that the Prophet ﷺ, he was ummiyan, he was illiterate. As Allah mentions twice inside Surah Al-A'raf, he was an illiterate individual, and the Quraysh knew that. They were fully well versed that the Prophet ﷺ, he cannot read or write. It's not plausible for him to come with this out of his own mind, out of his own tongue, his own speech. وَمَا يَنطِقُ عَنِ الْهَوَىٰ إِنْ هُوَ إِلَّا وَحْيٌ يُوحَىٰ. In the beginning of Surah Al-Najm, the 53rd chapter of Qur'an, وَمَا يَنطِقُ عَنِ الْهَوَىٰ. He doesn't speak of his own desires. Whatever he utters is divine revelation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So they knew this in the back of their minds, that the speech that the Prophet is presenting, or what he's reciting, or what he's saying to us, this must be divine. This must be from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Allah gives this warning that if he had made this up himself, or he'd uttered this speech, لَأَخَذْنَا مِنْهُ بِالْيَمِينِ, we would have taken him from the right side, ثُمَّ لَقَطَعْنَا مِنْهُ الْوَتِينَ, then we would have cut off his artery, meaning we would have destroyed him. That if he's trying to attribute something to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or making something up, فَمَا مِنْكُم مِّنْ أَحَدٍ عَنْهُ حَاجِزِينَ, and none of you is going to be able to prevent that even if we was to do that to our own Prophet. وَإِنَّهُ لَتَذْكِرَةٌ لِلْمُتَّقِينَ. Indeed, this Qur'an is tazkira lil-muttaqeen, is a reminder for the pious individuals. وَإِنَّا لَنَعْلَمُ أَنَّ مِنْكُم مُكَذِّبِينَ. And indeed we know there's going to be amongst you those who are the rejectors. There's going to be people who reject the Qur'an or don't believe in the Qur'an. And that's why we find that the first challenge inside the Qur'an, with what is known as ayatul tahaddi. There's numerous ayat of tahaddi, ayat verses which are challenging mankind to bring something like the Qur'an, whether 10 verses, 1 verse, a whole surah. These are known as ayatul tahaddi, ayat of challenging mankind. And the first ayah of challenging mankind is in the beginning of Surah Al-Baqarah, verse number 21. وَإِن كُنْتُمْ فِي رَيْبٍ مِّمَّا نَزَّلْنَا عَلَىٰ عَبْدِنَا فَأْتُوا بِسُورَةٍ مِّن مِّثْلِهِ وَادْعُوا شُهَدَاءَكُم مِّن دُونِ اللَّهِ إِن كُنتُمْ صَادِقِينَ فَإِن لَّمْ تَفْعَلُوا وَلَن تَفْعَلُوا فَاتَّقُوا النَّارَ الَّتِي وَقُودُهَا النَّاسُ وَالْحِجَارَةُ. Allah makes this challenge to the whole world. That's how the Qur'an here is beginning in verse number 21, that if you have any doubt in that which you sent down upon our servant, then bring one surah like unto it, and call upon all of your witnesses or your aides or your helpers besides Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't leave it at that. Allah says, فَإِن لَّمْ تَفْعَلُوا وَلَن تَفْعَلُوا, and you can't do it. And then Allah mentions وَلَن تَفْعَلُوا, and you can never ever do it. Just this kalima lan, lam noon, lan, Imam Zamakhshari inside his Tafseer Al-Kashaf, he says this is lan of al-abadiyah, for eternity, that you will never ever be able to do it. So Allah isn't saying you might able to achieve it. Allah said that you will never ever be able. 1444 odd years have gone by, no one has been able to write or bring something like the speech, the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَإِنَّا لَنَعْلَمُ أَنَّ مِنْكُمْ مُكَذِّبِينَ, a warning to these individuals. وَإِنَّهُ لَحَسْرَةٌ عَلَى الْكَافِرِينَ, it's just going to be a loss for those people who disbelieve, a loss in their rejection of the last day, a loss in their rejection of the speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, a loss of their wealth, a loss of everything that they try to gain inside this dunya. وَإِنَّهُ لَحَقُّ الْيَقِينَ, indeed this is the truth, a reality. Just as the surah begins with Al-Haqqah, derived from the word Al-Haqq, that this is a reality, as Ibn Kathir mentions, because Al-Yawm Al-Akhir, Yawm Al-Akhirah, qad yuhaqqaq, is something which is definitely going to be established. So Allah gives it that title of being called Al-Haqqah. And likewise Imam Sa'di inside his tafsir, he gives a similar wording as well, that this is something yuhaqqiq, something which is going to be established, and no doubt shak regarding that. فَسَبِّحْ بِاسْمِ رَبِّكَ الْعَظِيمِ, so glorified in your Lord, the magnificent. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is how this surah ends, showing the power, the might of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So a Muslim should be one who is praising and glorifying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect us on that day, and not to enter us into any form of punishment, and to bring us to accountability without any accountability, in that sense of questioning and concealing our sins and our mistakes on that day. وَقُولُ قَوْلِ هَذَا وَاسْتَغْفِرُ لَلِي وَلَكُمْ وَلِجَمِيعِ الْمُسْلِمِينَ فَاسْتَغْفِرُوهُ إِنَّهُ هُوَ الْغَفُورُ الرَّحِيمُ.
تبارك الذي بيده الملك وهو على كل شيء قدير.